I'd like to call this meeting of the Bellingham Public Works Public Safety Committee to order. We have 5 items before us today. Joining me on the committee is Gene Knutson, and filling in for Roxanne Murphy will be April Barker. The first item that we have before us is an ordinance amending the Bellingham Municipal Code to repeal Bellingham Municipal Code 10.30.020 and to adopt a new code section consistent with state law to prohibit the unlawful display or carry of an electronic controlled device.
Good morning, Shane Brady from the legal department. This is for information only this morning, and just briefly advise the council what's going on with this agenda item is that currently the Bellingham Municipal Code 10.30.020 prohibits possession of a taser or stun gun or similar device, and this is an ordinance that was passed in 2005. We've discussed recently that there was some changes and some recent authority in the law and just some developments in the legal landscape, I guess I would say, that has caused the legal department and the police department, Chief Cook here to my left, to discuss Bellingham's ordinance, whether it's necessary, and other things we could do to regulate tasers and electronic control devices. And I would add that my very informal research showed that I think we're one of the few cities in the state that does have such an ordinance prohibiting an outright ban on electronic control devices. Don't quote me on the number, but of the bigger cities, I think we're one of the few. And there's already an RCW under state law that prohibits the unlawful display of a weapon that would intimidate another or cause reasonable affront or alarm. So with all that in mind, and with what's going on in the legal landscape, staff is recommending that we repeal our ban on electronic control devices and adopt a version of state law that would specifically include electronic control device as a weapon that cannot be displayed in a way that would cause reasonable affront or alarm or used to intimidate another.
Okay. Questions from committee?
Chief, I'd just like to hear your point of view on your point of view on this.
Sure, thank you, Gene. I believe the council members may recall that this ordinance was originally developed at the request of the police department. I believe it was Chief Carroll at the time, who had some serious concerns about the ongoing development and proliferation of electronic control devices or stun guns. And over concern about our officers' welfare, this ordinance was passed. And I believe the intent was sound then. I still believe it's a reasonable concern for us to have. However, as Shane mentioned, there have been some developments with certain courts that indicate that it's very likely that any ordinance similar to ours, including ours, would be ruled unconstitutional. So to try to get ahead of that decision and so that we have a viable alternative in its place, this was the result of that discussion with the city legal department. So it's not to say we don't have those same concerns, but I believe this is the more reasonable course of action to take.
Thanks, Chief.
Any? No? Yeah, I agree with what you had to say with it. I still have the same concerns I had when we voted for that ban, but I do understand that, and I don't think, because the way the court ruling came down, to spend a lot of money defending if somebody goes against it wouldn't make a whole lot of sense and things. So I guess it's probably the right thing to do to bring it forward, even though I don't agree with it. But, yeah.
I would just add that this is consistent with how we regulate most other weapons as well. The RCW 941 270 includes knives, daggers. It's in some kind of a catch-all. So this would just be consistent with how we regulate other weapons as well. So.
Yeah. No, I understand that. There were a lot of clear reasons why we did it before, and they're still there.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah, but it's beyond our power right now, I think. So this was for information only, and then the ordinance will be brought forward.
Correct.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Yep. Okay. The next, excuse me. The next item is Advanced Life Support ALS service fees for 2017. Chief?
Good morning, council members. Bill Newbold, Fire Department. The addendum that's put in front of you is will establish a 2017 ALS service fee in alignment with our current contract that we're operating under with the county. I want to differentiate our current contract with what may come around the corner should an EMS levy be approved by the voters. Our current contract is a 3-year contract that began in 2014, and it was 2014, 15, and 16. That contract has an automatic provision for renewal. However, the ALS annual service fee was only specified for those 3 years, 14, 15, and 16. And there's a method in there for establishing a fee for subsequent years should that contract continue to be renewed. Because it's a rolling contract, as it stands today by itself, that contract is in effect until the year 2018, December 31st, 2018. So we are in need of establishing a ALS service fee with the county in the amount that's specified there in the addendum. All of this may become a moot point should the voters approve the proposed EMS levy that'll be on the November 2016 ballot. In which case, if that's approved, then we'll be working with the county to establish a successor ILA, which has a different structure, different provisions, different amount, et cetera. But we want to be in compliance with the current contract and kind of a couple steps ahead that should the voters not approve the EMS levy, we do have a contract amount going into 2017. So that's kind of the gist. I will point out that on the addendum itself, if you take a look at that in your packet, just above the bold, there's the statement that says 2017 revenue increase equals $124,417. It's proposed that we strike the word revenue, and such that the statement would be that the 2017 increase equals. And that was consideration between both our legal department and the county. And so we're want to advise that should this be routed for signatures upon your approval, then we'll be removing that word revenue before it's routed.
Okay.
Okay, I'll move approval of the addendum and strike the word revenue.
Okay. Any comments? Okay.
I
Yes.
just want to
Questions?
thank you, because clearly from all the work that you guys did on the EMS levy, the forethought, and then of course here, making sure that we have a plan B, and clearly the administration is doing a great job of keeping us all prepared, so thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Got a motion before us. All those in favor, answer aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. We will recommend approval tonight. Thank you, Chief. Our next item is a noise variance request from the Public Works Department for Sunset Drive water main replacement. Ted.
Good morning,
morning.
Ted Carlson, Public Works Department, along with Steve Day, who's the project manager on this particular capital project. This is part of the city's annual water main replacement program. We have 3 locations that are part of that particular project. Right now, they're working on Nevada Street. The contractor is doing a main replacement there. They'll then move over to Champion downtown, do some water main work there. And the location that's before council today is Sunset Drive between James Street and Ellis Street. A portion of that is actually within the WashDOT's limited access, so the area that's managed by the DOT, which requires any work in that area be done at nighttime. So that's part of our specs. That's part of the project that the contractor bid on. When looking at that, due to the traffic and some of the other challenges of that site, we looked at extending the nighttime work that for portions of that entire segment between James Street and Ellis Street. We're requesting 15 days of night work. That's non-consecutive days, not knowing exactly what the contractor's schedule will be. They anticipate being at this location around mid-July. As part of the outreach that we do for nighttime work, there'll be certainly a press release that will go out, individual mailers to the properties that are adjacent and impacted, and then we'll always continue to work with the property owners to try to mitigate or reduce the impacts of nighttime work. Part of that is the contractor will be using backup warning devices that are made for nighttime work. You still have to have an audible sound when backing up, but it's a reduced noise specifically for nighttime work. And then they do some other things with their equipment to try to eliminate the banging of tailgates that would not be allowed, banging of dump truck tailgates. But there still will be noise. There will be construction that will include some grinding of pavement, obviously replacing of the water main. So it will be, there will be some noise. There's about, I think, 30 residential properties that are probably most directly impacted, and we'll make sure to work with them. A big advantage of doing the nighttime work is there'll be some compression of the work schedule. We'll be able to go a little bit quicker, get out of the area quicker, but also certainly reduce the impact of the traveling public. So that is the request for the noise variance. Steve's here that he can answer any specific questions about the project, but that's the request before council today.
Okay.
I'll move approval. I'll take noise over traffic any day. I live out by that area. It would be an absolute nightmare to do it during the day, so I think this is great. We can do it at night. I know there will be a little noise, but won't be too bad.
Okay. Yes.
So recently, I had a constituent that's had a bit of frustration around noise and construction usually happening before 7 a.m. So you'll do a press release, you'll do mailers, and in this particular case, I said call 911 and say it's a non-emergency if people are outside the time they're supposed to be. So I guess how long will that process take? Will 911 operators be aware that there's something going on in that area if you get a lot of calls, or will it then get routed back to city?
Usually the approach with that, the approach that the homeowner might take would be certainly to call 911, get the police involved. The police will review the situation, understand the timing of the issue, and at that point, if the contractor is operating outside of either this noise variance or outside of the typical work hours that are required by BMC, they would ask the contractor to shut down. Okay. In our outreach, we certainly encourage the first call, to be to the Public Works Department or to the project engineer, especially if it's during operating hours. It's usually a phone call to find out what's going on, and as a project engineer, we'll basically be on call during those night works if there's an issue.
And I didn't mention it, but the hours of work for the evening work will be from 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. So they'll have to have it buttoned up before. They can't start until after evening commute, and then they'll have to be finished before the morning commute starts.
Okay. Anything else? Okay, we have a motion before us. All those in favor, answer aye.
Aye.
Okay, we will recommend approval tonight. So, our next item is East Illinois Street Turning Movement Restriction. Ted,
Thank you.
again.
Again, Ted Carlson, Public Works Department, joined by Eric Johnston, Assistant Public Works Director. This item is an information only. I think the council is aware of the trial turn restrictions that were put in place last year on East Illinois between James Street and Sunset. A little bit of background on this before I turn it over to Eric for the proposal and the analysis. This project was really put in place as part of implementing the bicycle master plan. So looking at the policy direction from the city comp plan, really that gives some goals on mode shift and providing priority to other types of transportation, bicycling, cyclists in this case, to try to get a mode shift from people moving from single occupancy vehicles to other modes of transportation. And then, the climate action plan really builds on that as well. Again, trying to reduce the number of vehicle trips. The bicycle master plan really looks at how do we try to implement those policies, and the strategy is to try to create a comprehensive city network of different types of bicycle infrastructure. Certainly the bike lanes that have been in place for years, and we continue to put those in on arterials. But what's a little bit newer is identifying bicycle boulevards, and that's really what East Illinois is. It's a bicycle boulevard is taking advantage of lower volume, lower speed residential streets to provide bicycle connections throughout the city. And when we look at East Illinois, taking advantage of the existing non-motorized crossing of I-5 is a good opportunity to provide a safer, more comfortable way for cyclists to get east-west across the city. So looking at that and building on those policy goals, last year, we implemented really the first of what we hope will be many annual bicycle construction contracts. And you recall we put in bike lanes on Ohio as part of that, but also did quite a bit of marking throughout town with the green paint and also using sharrows and other wayfinding to identify bicycle boulevards, which brought us to East Illinois. And when the engineering staff, the operational traffic folks looked at East Illinois and looked at the volumes on this section of Illinois, which is a residential street. It's not an arterial, it's a residential neighborhood street. The volumes were higher than we would like to see, and certainly higher than the parallel streets that are of the same classification. So it certainly appeared as though it was a cut-through route. Folks were using it to avoid the James Sunset intersection and find their way over to whether it's the hospital or another way through town. So that was where we looked at using the guidance from the Bicycle Master Plan, installing turn restrictions that would eliminate some of the turn movements off of James Street onto Illinois, off of Sunset onto Illinois, and require people to use the rest of the network and focus on the arterials when they're getting through town. So that was the setup for it. There was public outreach prior to putting the trial turn restrictions in, 2 public meetings prior to that, where we received feedback. Put it in place for 7 or 8 months now, whatever the duration has been, to see whether it's something that was successful and should be done on a permanent basis. That's the background. I'll turn it over to Eric, and he can talk a little bit about what we found during that trial period, what some of the statistics were, and why we're proposing to move forward.
Thank you, Eric Johnston, Public Works. So as Ted mentioned, we have had this in place now since October of last year, and what we were looking to study were to see if there were negative impacts of making the proposed change. We had a high degree of confidence that there would not be a safety problem, it would not create a source of accidents for pedestrians or vehicles, but we wanted to see how the distribution of traffic would be redistributed within the neighbor and onto the arterial streets. And particularly we were concerned about Maryland Street, where folks are going to simply shift from using Illinois Street as the cut through to get over to Ellis or over to Meridian Street and start diverting on the neighborhood streets. And so we wanted to make sure that that was not going to happen. We didn't think it would, but we wanted to give it a shot. So the traffic trials are a good way to do that. The temporary measures were put in place, and over the course of a couple of months, observed traffic patterns both in person and with our counters that we had out there. And after about a 6-month period, we found that the traffic within the neighborhood itself redistributed itself relatively evenly. So traffic on Illinois Street went down by about 50%. Traffic on Maryland Street went up a little bit, but not disproportionately. So now the traffic volumes on the neighborhood streets have tended to even out and level out to be relatively comparable, between 300 and 600 cars per day on those streets. It's hard to say that that's precisely what it is because we measure traffic at a specific point in time, and that may vary throughout the week. But generally speaking, we're seeing that those traffic patterns within the neighborhood itself have leveled out. We have not seen a change in the safety. We have not seen an accident problem or anything that would cause us to see the need to be removed. We did commit that if that would to come up, we would take it out immediately, but we have not seen that to be a problem. We have obviously seen that there are folks who are needing to go now to use the arterials, Sunset or Alabama or James or over to Cornwall. And certainly some of those folks are very concerned about that. I've expressed a great deal of chagrin that the city is making the change and inconveniencing them. But that's part of the implementation of the Bicycle Master Plan that places priority over pedestrian and bicycle comfort over to some extent motorist convenience. And then that's truly what's happening here on Illinois Street. Certainly for folks who live in the neighborhood, that's less of a convenience now that have to take a different route to get to their home. Folks who have been living on Illinois Street through the public process have expressed a great deal of appreciation and desire for that to continue. Folks who live off of the Illinois onto the neighborhood side streets, some are concerned about the fact that there's a greater inconvenience. But from our analysis, that there's not been a substantial or negative impacts to traffic operations either in the neighborhood street or on the major arterials. Some folks who were using Illinois Street as a cut-through were quite vociferous in complaining about the fact that they had to go to Sunset and wait through the stoplights, but we have not seen a degradation in the level of service at those intersections. So in looking at the operational functionality, the safety impacts, the traffic volumes, the traffic speeds, neighborhood concerns, just general community concerns and questions and comments about the trial, we've are recommending and would likely be moving forward with implementation of the bicycle boulevard as a permanent installation consistent with the policy basis in the bicycle master plan. I think it's also important to note that the bicycle master plan's target audience is what is referred to as the casual and less confident rider. That one of the concerns that were questions that was raised is that there are already cyclists using Illinois Street, and we would agree with that. What we're trying to capture is not so much the people who are using bicycles to commute back and forth today, but folks who might do that as the bicycle network builds out over many, many years. So the bicycle master plan calls for the development of 134 new miles of bicycle infrastructure within the city, and that's to get to that next group of folks who would not feel comfortable if we don't make substantive changes such as this on Illinois Street. So the contract that Ted referenced for 2016, which is before council for approval today, has the conversion of the temporary trial to a permanent basis, and it will look very similar to other similar installations we've done on other city streets within the city of Bellingham, where it provides for, prohibits turning movements from one street onto Illinois Street, but it will allow for cyclists to come onto that street.
Gene.
Just a couple comments. When I started looking at this, I've been skeptical of it from the beginning, but in going back into recent history, or probably ancient history, back in 97 when the city council got out of the business of fighting over the traffic circles on Ellis Street, we gave the Public Works Department authority to come up with traffic calming devices without, other than the bids, without coming to council for approval. I fully understand that. And also, I remember King Street when that was stopped and local access only. And I support that because I don't want to go back to the way it used to be. It turned political. It was everybody going after everybody. I'm not a traffic engineer. I don't ever pretend to be one. But I have a solution, just a request on the second issue I'll be making when we get there. But this one is not, and I would ask Matt, it's not an official street closures, because if I'm correct, if we close a city street, it has to come to council. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's been past practice as well, to bring a full closure to city council, or a conversion of a street to an entire one-way has come to council as well. This is one that we feel is on the other side of the line, where it's an administrative action that staff can take, certainly with information to council.
Okay, I'll have more comments on the second issue. So.
Yes, April.
I guess I'm confused as to why it is coming to council. Is it just so that we would know? I just want, there's a lot of things. I was looking through the bike and the PED plan, and even some things we talked about when you're going to make some connections of Horton to Aldrich. I mean, it's just, that's the process, and it's been through a process that's vetted, hopefully through the constituents. And I mean, clearly you guys have thought out doing a traffic trial for 6 months, and I know it doesn't make everybody happy, but we've been through the public process. So I'm confused as to why some things are we going to always bring everything forward, or can we get to a place where we're only going to bring forward the things that need to come and be approved by us?
One reason this information session is coming before, because I've asked that it happen, because there has been a lot of discussion in the community about this, both pro and con and things, and in talking with Ted about this, and and recognizing the authority, the way it works. If it's street closing, we act and we have to vote on it. The other is administrative, but I felt it was really important that we bring it forward so people have a chance to understand what was being looked at and why, so we can have a fuller understanding. So that, we had that discussion, and Public Works felt it was a good idea as well. It's not just me saying, no, we talked about this, and we thought this was the way to bring it forward so we could discuss. So it could be discussed.
No, I'm glad you did.
People would understand what's going on.
I'm glad you did, and I appreciate them coming forward.
I think that Terry hit it right on the head. I think this is new. We've done, as Gene mentioned, we did something very similar on King Street a few years ago under the Neighborhood Traffic Safety Program, which was really looking at cut-through traffic kind of behind Trader Joe's on King, parallel to James. People were avoiding James. Essentially the same thing was done. Traffic diverters were put in so that would force people to the arterial streets and not use the residential streets to get through. This is a little bit different because it's providing priority access to the cyclists, but in essence it's a turn restriction. It's not allowing some movements to go through a residential street. And because it's the first time we're doing this, and because the bicycle master plan puts such an emphasis on these bicycle boulevards, I think it was a good idea to bring it forward for discussion. Hopefully in the future, as these become more and more frequent throughout the city and our traveling public is more aware of them, it's something that people will expect and have a better understanding of. And then they may not come to council every single time, except for certainly through the bid award. But at that same time, we're always happy to come and have a discussion about why we think this is a good idea and what we think we're going to achieve by implementing.
Yes, April.
And you're continuing to take public comment on the bike and ped plan, so if somebody just kind of got alerted to this and wants to go back and see if there's anything that they disagree with or agree with, they can let you know, and if they do bring up any glaring, they can go through that process, correct?
Yeah,
That's still open?
absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of the other things that will be happening in the near future on the bicycle boulevards as it relates to the bicycle master plan is additional wayfinding. We'll be putting in signage in addition to the pavement markings to try to show folks how to get to destinations throughout town using these bicycle boulevards, and it creates a little bit more comfortable route for them. Yeah.
Okay, anything else on this? Well, I do appreciate you bringing it forward, so we would be able to discuss it, and we'll
Yeah, sure.
see if there's other comments tonight from council people,
Absolutely.
members tonight. I just really feel anytime we're making new changes, trying to do with new mode shifts, we're gonna have, there's gonna be questions raised about questioning whether is this the right thing to do or not to do? Is this the best way to do it? Change is hard getting used to on any, especially in our neighborhoods, in terms of how it happens and getting used to it. And this is one of those elements. And I guess we'll have to see how it does work and play out and things, and recognizing that, yeah, we have to weigh some things against others.
Right.
But thank you for bringing it forward. So I think we got one more item before us. Is that it? Let me see. What have we got? Oh, yes. Bid award for the bicycle and pedestrian improvements, bid number 6B-2016.
Yes, thank you. This is the bid award for the bicycle pedestrian improvements for 2016, and there's several locations throughout the city where we'll be implementing projects that were identified in both the bicycle master plan and the pedestrian master plan. Probably the most notable this year will be making improvements along the Nevada-Kentucky Bicycle Boulevard. Just like taking advantage of the non-motorized crossing of I-5 at Illinois, this particular project takes advantage of an undercrossing along Kentucky under I-5. So we know I-5 has always been one of the biggest challenges for bicyclists getting through town, crossing I-5. That particular undercrossing is a pretty low volume crossing as well on Kentucky. And so this will take it a bicycle boulevard underneath I-5 along Kentucky and then work its way up east to take advantage of some of the improvements that were made in the Roosevelt neighborhood last year. And to the west, it'll go along Kentucky over to Cornwall, where we put the bicycle improvements in on Cornwall several years ago. So that's probably one of the most notable. There'll be some improvements down in the Fairhaven area along Mill Street and 24th, where we're putting in some pedestrian crossings near the new school, as well as a bicycle boulevard down there. And then most notable probably will be the permanent installation of the turn restrictions that we just spoke about at Illinois and James and Illinois and Sunset. So the lowest responsive and responsible bidder was Artisan Pacific out of Bellingham. Their bid was just under the engineer's estimate, and the city recommends approval.
Gene?
Do you know what the timing is, what they're going to start on first? Do you have any idea?
No, we have not received the schedule from the contractor at this point.
Do you know how soon this would happen?
Yeah, typically it takes, once council awards a bid, just generally speaking, it takes 3 to 4 weeks for us to get an executed contract. And then, we would give the notice of proceed to the contractor. So I would say work would start probably in July, August sometime.
The reason I bring it up, one of the complaints I heard on King Street is it happened And and there wasn't, what I'm looking for, is there a possible way, since it is going to have an effect in that area, could you guys have one more meeting before it goes permanent? And sit down
Absolutely.
with people? Because on King Street, I feel, other than it getting done, and it's worked out better than I expected, but the talk was it just happened, boom, and then that was it. I understand you've had meetings before, but I think something that's going to be permanent like this, if you could get together with the people around there and just,
Yeah, we're happy to do that.
okay.
Yes.
So I do think with all these new things coming up, it's important for the public to understand that the whole point of this, being a cyclist and a very low-level cyclist with my children, an 8 and 10-year-old especially, trying to get through the city, that we're trying to separate the cars. And I know it's very frustrating that you might have to go a little longer way or actually follow the arterials, but the whole point is eventually the same people that are frustrated that bikers are sharing the area or slowing them down or not being safe, hopefully will be diverted. And so I think it's just important to understand that, yes, as a car, you might have to take what is really deemed the route, and the bicycles will take their route. There will still be some interaction throughout, but I think it's just so important to realize that for that little bit extra in a car, it's really valuable, and it's for those people like myself with children that are trying to get from point A to point B and not have that conflict. So it's difficult, but I think it's working, and I'm looking forward to it.
Okay. Do I have a motion?
I so move.
Okay. Okay. Any comment related to the motion? Okay, we have a motion before us to accept the bid award. All those in favor, answer aye.
Aye.
Okay. We will recommend approval tonight, and I think that's the end of committee.
Thank you.